I'm the person who's always rooting for the underdogs. I'm never one to move with the crowd, as it seems lots of times the crowd is always moving in what I consider to be the wrong direction. This top 10 list covers some of those games the masses condemned as crap. Complete duds are just not good enough, forgettable mediocrity. Now, I'm not saying the masses are always wrong, as I do enjoy many of the AAA titles out there, but I'm no conformist. Here's a top 10 list of my favorite bad games. This list isn't a countdown, so it won't start at 10, and it's not necessarily in order of preference. Number 1. Minority Report. Now, we all know movie-based video games are usually pretty bad, but in 2002 I decided to give Minority Report a shot, and even though the rest of the video game world seemed to think it was a steaming pile, I quite enjoyed it. Played it through to the very end and was treated to its very odd ending sequence. Minority Report was considered bad mainly because of its generic feel, I guess. It was after all just a beat 'em up. And believe me when I tell you, we had our fair share of those in the early 2000s. But I love the controls for most part, and got a kick out of the ragdoll physics. I particularly love kicking about a downed enemy. This and that other PS2 game, The Bouncer, really caught my attention with these physics. Minority Report, however, was the better game. Movie tie-in, cash grab or not. Number 2. Oni. Oni, released in 2001, another supposed stinker. To think that two gaming giants, Rockstar and Bungie, had hands in this might come as a shock to most younger gamers. Maybe I was still caught up on the PS2, but as awkward as the controls were in this game, as silly and ineffective as some of the weapons were, I loved this game. Oni was a third-person action game where you could not only use hand-to-hand combat, but you also had a small arsenal at your disposal. You had to use the shoulder buttons to execute these techniques, which felt really odd, and sometimes landing your attacks was a production all on its own. But as quirky as this game was, it's another one stored away in my memory banks as an experience worth having. I particularly love the way Rockstar treated the final boss encounter. Real easy. I think I took him out with one shot. Number 3. Soldier of Fortune. I played the first Soldier of Fortune on the Dreamcast, then Soldier of Fortune Gold on the PS2, then Soldier of Fortune 2 Double Helix on the original Xbox. Then I followed the franchise over to Soldier of Fortune Payback on the PS3. And even though the older games, Part 1 on the hardest difficulty seemed hard as nails, I couldn't get over the no-holds-barred approach to violence and gore. I believe this was my first taste of this level of graphic violence in an action game, and it hooked me since. This game is extremely generic with poor voice acting, a sad excuse for a story, but regardless of the naysayers, I love this franchise and will play every single installment. Sometimes you just want a mindless arcade style experience, and Soldier of Fortune is just that. Release it on current gen and I'll be there. Number 4. Inversion. This game took a whole lot of flack for being a Gears of War clone. Personally, I don't see what the problem was. Most games, with the exception of some really innovative indie titles, are taking inspiration from somewhere else. An original idea isn't the easiest thing to come by, and even with that said, Inversion was a pretty decent game. Only real flaw was shadowing Gears of War. At the time, the graphics were decent enough, the voice acting was also satisfactory, but I particularly liked the story, which followed a cop who in the middle of all this chaos was just trying to find his wife and daughter. Not trying to save the world, not part of a revolution, not a super soldier, just a guy being a husband and dad. The gravity gun that everyone labeled a gimmick and just a tool thrown in to differentiate this game from Gears was in my opinion pretty cool. You see, the way I look at it is like this. If you're gonna rip off a huge title or franchise, at least do it well and with style, and that's what we got with Inversion. Number 5. Perfect Dark Zero. I have reason to believe most people who gave this game crap were avid fans of the original Perfect Dark. Now, I never played Perfect Dark, so my expectations were pretty much nowhere. I enjoyed this game and didn't see what all the fuss was about. I agree, the voice acting is piss poor, the story is overly simple, and the visuals even at the time for a launch title weren't that great, but the controls were solid with a cover system that works and is sadly lacking in many first-person shooters to this day, and the co-op system link option was ideal. This was one of my first games on the 360 and it did the trick just fine. Number 6. Turning Point Fall of Liberty. I'll admit, Turning Point Fall of Liberty was one seriously flawed game. I reviewed it years ago and expressed those feelings clearly, but the game wasn't unplayable by no means. I appreciated its twist on history's storyline where the Nazis won, similar to the Homefront story. The game had some try-hard mechanics where, while flawed, still got a point for effort and attempt at originality. The graphics were terrible even by those days' standards, and nothing about this game stood out. But I guess I'm not the hardest gamer to please, as I don't expect an epic experience from every game I play. Number 7. Medal of Honor Warfighter and 2010. Now, where Medal of Honor is concerned, I love pretty much every Medal of Honor game, and I've been playing this since part 1. Still got my PS1 version in my collection, safe and sound. Now, when Medal of Honor decided to give the Modern Warfare style a shot and finally ditch World War II, I was still happily on board. I love Medal of Honor 2010, and I absolutely loved Warfighter. Now, the shit this game took is similar to the shit Inversion had to go through. People hated on it simply because it was unoriginal, bland, and a rip-off of another or other games. Now, the same could be said for Call of Duty, but people praise Call of Duty every single year regardless. Medal of Honor in my eyes did nothing wrong. Yes, it feels like a generic shooter, but a generic shooter done well enough to warrant a buy and a complete playthrough. And although we'll probably never see another in the series, I'd buy another Medal of Honor game in a heartbeat. Number 8. Zombi U. Now, I'm not gonna say this is my favorite Wii U game, but it certainly did breathe a bit of new life in the saturated zombie genre. What pisses me off is that this game was re-released on all other platforms. Now why? Were the devs strapped for cash? I see no real justification for that release. Now, I admit that Zombi U had several unique elements to it. One worth mentioning is permadeath, but the main selling point was its unique use of the Wii pad. Now, you drop a game like this years after the Wii U's release on more powerful consoles with the same old graphics, no gamepad functionality, and what's the point? It's gonna take a beating from all who never got the opportunity to play it the right way, as being bland and pretty much absolute redundant nothingness. Devs really took a shit on Zombi U when they did this. Major thumbs down on that decision, Ubisoft. Number 9. Red Steel. Here we go again. Another game I enjoyed completely. Yeah, it wasn't as great as it should have been for a game that was to be showcasing Wii U's functionality as a motion control device, but I was able to see past that and love pretty much every minute of this game. Maybe it was a novelty of motion controls at the time, but I was impressed, even when my sword slashes didn't function correctly. Here's the thing about me. I welcome creativity and innovation, even when not executed perfectly. I love my Wii U's gamepad, and when people say what Nintendo should have done is release the gamepad optionally, or not at all, I say no. I need disparity in my gaming. Yes, I bought my Xbox One with a Kinect and would have it absolutely no other way. I'm not a fanboy, and I do not subscribe to fanboy-like beliefs. The PS4, despite what butthurt fanboys say, would not be significantly different than the Xbox One if not for the Kinect. So even if it is an NSA spy cam, it adds a difference, and I'd buy the next generation of Xbox with a Kinect if it came with one. So my point is, even though Red Steel was far from perfect, it gave me something else to do in a game, and it wasn't nearly as bad as people made it seem. Number 10. Blue Stinger. I got my Dreamcast early, real early. I grabbed the Japan version, which was released nearly a year before the US version, so I ended up with a few Japanese versions of a few games. Blue Stinger happened to be my first Dreamcast game. Now, other than a host of other flaws, the camera was the main culprit. In the Japan version, it had an automatic camera system, but as with most auto cams, this wasn't that efficient. They tried to fix it in the US version, but only made it worse. I much prefer the camera going wide, showing me as much of my environment than the claustrophobic cam we got with the US release. Other than the camera, Blue Stinger had a silly story, bad voice acting, and terrible controls, but that didn't stop me from playing it till the end, and enjoying almost every minute of it. Maybe it was a novelty again that got to me. It was after all my first Dreamcast game, but even so, I had a great time with it, and to this day a feeling of nostalgia comes over me when I remember those Blue Stinger days. What was your favorite game that no one else seemed to like? Let me know in the comments section below, and remember to like, favorite, and subscribe for more top 10 videos like this one. Thanks for watching.